Call the meeting to order. This is meeting number 123 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, August the 21st, 2024, the committee is resuming a study on protecting certain Canadian manufacturing sectors, including electric vehicles, aluminum and steel, against related Chinese imports and measures. We have with us today from the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, Luc de Pulford, Executive Director by video conference, and from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, Samuel Bickett, lawyer and researcher for the Hong Kong Human Rights Advocate. We welcome all. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with a round of questions. Each witness has up to 5 minutes, and I will keep track of the time for everyone. Mr. de Pulford, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's very good to see you again. As you heard, I am creator and executive director of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. That's an international cross-party group of parliamentarians working to address challenges associated with the Chinese Communist Party under the leadership of Xi Jinping. And I'm proud to say, actually, that this includes around 30 Canadian parliamentarians of all parties, some of which are represented today. On electric vehicles, since 2020, China has emerged as the largest manufacturer and exporter of EVs in the world, and its capacity continues to grow as a result of policies such as extensive state subsidies and other non-market practices. In 2023, China's annual EV exports totaled $47.2 billion, up from $0.2 billion in 2018. Automobile imports from China to Canada's largest port in Vancouver jumped 460% year over year to 44,356 in 2023. China undermines markets and competition with massive state subsidies amounting to $57 billion between 2016 and 22. A further 20% cost advantage is achieved through Chinese control over the supply chain and raw materials. This allows Chinese EVs to undercut the market by between 20 and 30%. This doesn't even include the advantage gained through China's comparative lack of environmental and labor standards, including through the presence of forced or state-imposed labor in Chinese supply chains. Similarly, and very importantly, Chinese overcapacity in aluminium and steel is structural, persisting, and worsening. These are highly strategic industries core to the development and deployment of innovation, especially in the defense and energy transition sectors. So despite softening global demand, China, the world's largest steelmaker, has increased its steelmaking capacity by 18.6 million metric tons since 2018. This is more than Canada's total production capacity. Similarly, China's primary aluminium capacity has grown from 11% of global production share to 59% over the last 2 decades, with the government investing up to $70 billion between 2013 and 17. China's weakening economy now exposes this excess capacity even further, fueling unprecedented export surges that are disrupting markets and creating spillover effects in other sectors and across the globe. Failure to address this spillover will leave our companies weakened and lacking the financial capacity to make investments required for the energy transition. Takeovers by Chinese companies, which would further embed Chinese supply chains, may end up being the only option to prevent permanent closures and resultant job losses across the whole of our own supply chain. And I think really important to emphasize, Beijing makes no secret of its intent to undermine the economic security of liberal democracies, as it views our values as an existential threat to the regime's legitimacy. Neither is Beijing averse to weaponizing its advantages in pursuit of its global ambitions. So very briefly, remedial action, what can we do? Well, addressing this is much more than simply seeking to protect our markets from Chinese overcapacity, unfair competition, and distortionary practices. It's about the principles of free and fair trade, supporting the innovation of our companies and ensuring companies and workers gain from an energy transition that is secure, clean, and aligns with our core values. We have to think beyond bilaterals and tariffs. Low demand overcapacity is proliferating globally, in addition to and beyond China, in particular in the ASEAN, Middle East, and North Africa. So we'd recommend developing a shared strategy to address the issue in emerging economies. I want to emphasize that whatever is done, it has to be done in alignment with allies. The reason for that is that there are ways around tariffs, and the PRC has demonstrated willingness and ability to circumvent them. It's also worth noting here that the consequences of misalignment with allies on tariffs can have far-reaching consequences for free trade and other bilateral or plurilateral trade agreements. So Canada could and should build upon the commitment from G7 leaders in June 2024, and I quote, acting together to promote economic resilience, confront non-market policies and practices that undermine the level playing field and our economic security, and to strengthen our coordination to address global overcapacity challenges. Close quote. This is an international problem that requires international alignment to address. Madam Chair, I'm very happy to address questions and recommendations, and I yield the floor.
On to Mr. Bickett for up to 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for inviting me to appear before the Standing Committee on behalf of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation to talk about our work into how China uses Hong Kong to evade Canadian sanctions. This is a related issue to the import issues that you're speaking about today, and really is about how the Chinese government is willing to evade tariffs, evade sanctions on a broader basis. Merci d'avoir invité à comparaître devant le comité.
Thank you for having invited me to speak today in front of the Standing Committee on International Trade on behalf of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation.
CFHK is a non-governmental organization operating in Canada, the US, UK, and EU, and is focused on human rights and freeing political prisoners in Hong Kong. I am a human rights lawyer and international sanctions specialist who is the author of the CFHK report called Beneath the Harbor, Hong Kong's Leading Role in Sanctions Evasion. For this report, we extensively reviewed data sources, including Russian customs records, vessel tracking data, Hong Kong companies' registry filings, and came to one inescapable conclusion. Hong Kong has gone rogue. Previously a key partner in the global economy, the city's government now serves some of the world's most brutal regimes by smuggling military technology, cash, and prohibited commodities through the territory to flout Canadian and international sanctions. Our findings on Hong Kong's supply of military components to Ukraine are particularly alarming. Just after the Ukraine war began in February 2022, Hong Kong shipments to Russia dropped for 2 months before beginning to rise rapidly in the spring. By the end of 2022, shipments had almost doubled from pre-war levels. These were not benign shipments. Between August and December 2023, of the $2 billion in goods shipped from Hong Kong to Russia, $750 million, nearly 40%, and this is US dollars, comprised goods on the common high priority items list. This is a list of items Canada and its allies consider to be of the highest priority to Russia's war effort, 40% of shipments. Statistics aside, our report reveals how the Chinese and Hong Kong governments are allowing unprincipled people to profit off of the most dangerous, destabilizing states in the world, in particular the regimes in Russia, North Korea, and Iran. To give a couple of examples from our findings, a Hong Kong company that claimed to sell fertilizer and charcoal called Pyraclinos shipped millions of dollars in military-grade semiconductors to sanctioned Russian military supplier VMK. We discovered that its true owners are carefully hidden behind a network of front directors and shareholders from Cyprus, Kyrgyzstan, and Bulgaria. Neither Pyraclinos nor any of their front companies or individuals have been sanctioned. Li Jianwang was a Hong Kong trader who ran Arctronics International, a company shipping drone and missile components to Iran, which has regularly supplied these weapons to Russia and Middle Eastern proxy militias. When the U.S. sanctioned Arctronics last year, Li simply dissolved the company and started a new one called ETS International, which remains unsanctioned. A Hong Kong company, Align Trading, reported shipping 2 cargoes of integrated circuits purportedly produced by a French company, Vectrowave, to AO Trek, a company suspected by Ukraine to be supplying the Russian military. Vectrowave is a military contractor that produces expensive, highly specialized chips for use in military aircraft and communications equipment. None of the companies or individuals involved have been sanctioned. And as this is happening, the Hong Kong government, at the behest of Beijing, has explicitly said that it won't intervene to enforce Canadian or international sanctions, effectively inviting these smugglers to set up shop in the city. So what can Canada do? For starters, Canada should use its new secondary sanctions authority to sanction Hong Kong, Chinese, and other third country evaders. In mid-2023, Canada amended the Special Economic Measures Act to permit secondary sanctions. This was a positive and essential step to addressing the problem. But more than a year later, Canada has yet to exercise this power. The United States and the EU, in contrast, have regularly designated third country collaborators for sanctions throughout Russia's war in Ukraine. Simply sanctioning trading companies is not enough, however. It is extraordinarily easy to dissolve a sanctioned Hong Kong company and set up a new one in a matter of days. Canada and its allies must get serious about targeting the infrastructure behind these activities by sanctioning logistics companies, corporate service agencies, and most importantly of all, financial institutions. There also must be more focus placed on sanctioning the individuals behind these companies, and importantly, this must be done in concert with allies in the US, the EU, and Australia. Second, Canada should ramp up enforcement against Canadian participants in these schemes. In September 2023, the U.S. Treasury Department published data on suspicious activity reports related to Russian sanctions evasion. Of Western countries discussed in the report, Canada ranked third after the U.S. and U.K. for SARs filed against their citizens. The companies and individuals named in these SARs are not public information, but they suggest that there is potential for more expansive investigation of Canadian sanctions evaders. Finally, Canada and its allies must speed up the sanctions designations process. It typically takes many months to investigate and sanction a person. This pace has allowed evaders to run circles around the West, moving assets and changing corporate identities long before sanctions catch up to them. Bureaucracy and layers of review should be minimized, and investigators should be empowered to move quickly and efficiently while being provided with all the resources they need. With Russia slowly but surely encroaching further into Ukraine, there is limited time for Canada and its allies to take decisive action. We strongly encourage the committee and the government to prioritize this issue. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much to both our witnesses. On now to Garnet Jenius for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here and for very important and powerful testimony. I'll start with Mr. de Pulford. In your view, is the government of China deliberately pursuing a strategy to dominate the electric vehicle supply chain and undermine our strategic industries, or is it proceeding in this direction sort of by happenstance?
Thank you, Mr. Jenius. Yes is the short answer. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to the words of the man himself. So in a speech delivered at the 7th session of the Communist Party's Finance and Economic Committee in April 2020, Xi Jinping said, China will aim to form a counterattack and deterrence against other countries by fostering killer technologies and strengthening the global supply chain's dependence on China. And that is a very literal translation, Mr. Jenner. So you can see quite clearly this is an explicitly stated strategy of the Chinese Communist Party. Why governments around the world continue to sleepwalk into it is a question which is completely beyond me.
Mr. de Pulford, I think that's a very powerful quote because you're bringing us the words of Xi Jinping explicitly framing the effort to dominate the electric vehicle supply chain in military terms, counterattack, deterrence. He is pursuing a policy, it seems, aimed at dominating and controlling these industries as part of what he perceives to be a competition with us. So our response, presumably, it has to be to take steps to not be dependent on the Chinese economy for these critical industries, to allow ourselves to have other sources, other alternatives that don't involve the potential for this kind of counterattack and deterrence. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. And unfortunately, I fear that in some industries, it might be a little bit too late. I mean, certainly when it comes to processing of rare earth materials, for example, China's processing capacity so dominates the global ability to process these kinds of materials that it's pretty difficult to know how else and where else we can get it done. Similarly, in renewable energy, or even for the production and processing of lithium and lithium batteries, so many different areas related to the renewable industry alone have become totally dominated by China as a part of this explicit strategy. But yes, auditing and reducing dependency as a matter of urgency is something we all ought to be doing.
Thank you very much. I want to ask you about the ESG movement, and I'll make a statement and invite your comment on it. The too often the ESG movement has led to a kind of exclusive focus on the E and ignoring social and governance consequences as well as strategic consequences for certain decisions. And the push for a green transition has been accompanied by certain decision makers turning a blind eye to the human implications, to the way that sourcing of these materials has led to slave labor and deplorable conditions in, for instance, mines in the DRC. And I know you've done a great deal of work on the Uyghur genocide, which is part of this as well. Do you agree that this is a problem, and is it critically important that we hold green industries to strong human rights standards and not allow a blind eye to be turned to human rights in the name of a aspired for green transition?
Thank you for the question. Well, I think without naming any specific companies and potentially abusing parliamentary privilege in the process, it has been a surprise to me at just how many companies have been happy to burnish their credentials around the S and the G while continuing to source shamelessly from places that are known to be riven with Uyghur forced labor. Let me give you a couple of examples. All four of the Uyghur region's polysilicon manufacturers are strongly implicated in the forced labor of Uyghurs, all four of them. And that accounts for about 40% of the global supply of polysilicon, without which it isn't possible to make solar panels. Key actors in the lithium processing and distribution supply chain, they are very strongly connected to forced labor transfer schemes. You know, these schemes, government-sponsored schemes, where people mainly from ethnic minorities are effectively dumped in companies and where they have to work against their will. We know this from Chinese government data, and it's demonstrated very credibly in the literature now why it is that these companies seem to be able to hold their noses where there's such a clear connection to forced labor is rather baffling. So I tend to agree with your analysis.
12 seconds remaining.
Question.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sidhu, for 6 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for coming today on this very important study. Mr. Pulford, the Canadian EV sector is growing, and we obviously see a future in which it will be a vital part of the green transition. How crucial is it that we protect these industries in their infancy from unfair labor practices?
Well, it's absolutely crucial, and it's crucial to do that in concert with allies. We have to find ways of ensuring that the tariffs that are now being imposed both by Canada, a very welcome decision around tariffs imposed by Canada itself, but also by the EU, do not find themselves circumvented by China through the development of electric vehicles in, say, for example, Slovakia or other perhaps Eastern European countries, and that there are no weak links in the chain of resilience. Without that, it's hard to see how our electric vehicle industries are going to be able to survive when, I mean, you heard the numbers that I recited earlier, when tens of billions of dollars of state subsidies have been pumped into them, and the overcapacity is now so extraordinarily high that, you know, all of our domestic industries are hiding to nothing. So absolutely, we need to do more to seed investment into our own electric vehicle manufacturing supply chain, but we need to ensure that the market distortion that China has become extraordinarily adept at meting out to our industries, that we are resistant to it. Thank you.
And perhaps you mentioned Europe, and perhaps you can build on that. What is Europe doing differently than what we're doing here in North America? I'd just like to learn more about that from your perspective.
Well, the European Union as itself has just decided to impose tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, and it's done that partly because something in the region last year of well over 25% worth of electric vehicles in the European Union were produced in China. The slight difficulty is that not every country in Europe has a similar relationship with the People's Republic of China. So some that decide not to impose bilateral tariffs or even unilateral tariffs might find themselves exploited as a market by Chinese electric vehicles. For example, my own country, the United Kingdom, which has not yet decided whether or not it will impose tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. What that may mean is very cheap electric vehicle cars for UK consumers, but it's also going to mean an utter defenestration of the UK car industry, or what remains of it. So there's a bit of a disparity, just to answer your question, Mr. Sidhu, but clearly I think there is alignment between the European Union and Canada when it comes to tariffs, and that should be expanded to ensure that there is real transatlantic resilience.
Correct. And there's got to be unity shown against this. And so we've got unity here in North America, as you know. In addition to the study that we're doing here on the EV sector, our government is taking decisive decisions to protect the industry and its workers. And our committee is also seized with the issue of the upcoming CUSMA review, which we began studying in the spring, in which we'll be returning to shortly. In your view, could the alignment that we've seen amongst CUSMA member states on EV tariffs help facilitate negotiations on these issues when it comes to the CUSMA review?
Yes, absolutely. And as I was trying to indicate in my presentation at the very beginning, my opening remarks, clearly the G7 commitment on this also needs to be fleshed out. And I think there could be real harmonization and cross-fertilization between those two things. The key thing is to really underline and emphasize that if we think that we're going to deal with this overcapacity and state subsidy problem, what is effectively dumping, although technically it's not, from China, if we think we're going to be able to deal with that unilaterally, we're really not. And we need to try to create fertile soil for international cooperation wherever possible.
Thank you. And I've got probably less than 2 minutes left, but maybe I'll come back to you as well in terms of recommendations. If there's 3 things that you would recommend to the committee or other member states to participate so we protect our industries, what would those be? You may have mentioned in your opening statement, but I might have missed it.
Well, I think it's very important to audit dependency with a view to reducing that throughout these industries, but certainly in concert with allies. And again, underlining whatever is done needs to be done in alignment with allies to ensure harmonization between our imposition of tariffs, for example, and our free trading agreements with one another, which can't be jeopardized where there is misalignment. And that currently is the case. I think there's quite a lot to be ironed out there. But I also feel that we need to do a lot more to bring front and center our commitment to human rights and supply chains. We want a slave-free transition. We don't want a green transition on the back of Uyghur slavery. And if we continue to depend on China, that's what we're going to get.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Madam Chair, I think I've got less than 30 seconds left, so I'll cede my time. Not enough time.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your opening statements that were very relevant. My first question will be for the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, and I'm a proud member of this alliance. So you are an association that has members in many different countries throughout the world. May 15th, you published a declaration on the G7 that targeted some priorities that you'd like us to cover at the summit. And this includes several recommendations. One of them was, and I quote, to coordinate responses to economic coercion from any state, including China, end of quote. Do you worry that coercive measures on an economic level could be implemented by China following the tariffs that were implemented? And what response would you recommend to this?
Thank you very much indeed for the question. Very good to see you. I think there are a couple of things to say about economic coercion. The first and perhaps the most important is that we are still lacking coherence in terms of our response. You might remember that in the case of Lithuania, who it was argued had illegally been coerced by Beijing, that there was a case that was brought forward by the European Union at the World Trade Organization and was recently dropped in slightly mysterious circumstances. We know that the European Union has an anti-coercion tool, a mechanism which we've not seen work. And we also know that the G7 has come forward with various proposals to try to combat economic coercion, but we've not really seen it happen. So all of which is to say, there's a lot of talk and not much action. Economic coercion is extremely difficult to deal with, but I tend to rather agree with the former Secretary General of NATO, who spoke about an economic Article 5, that we need to find a way of ensuring that when one of our democratic number is bullied or singled out for economic coercion, that we will all come together and do what we can to support them. Quite an interesting example of this, without going on too long, was the Australian wine tariffs. After Australia had asked for an investigation into the origins of COVID, China imposed 220% tariffs on Australian wine, which could have caused some economic damage. But actually, the rest of the world seemed to pick up and buy more Australian wine to deal with it. That would be a slightly fatuous example of an economic Article 5 that might be something that we can look at. So briefly, we need to find a way of coordinating our response to economic coercion, and we need to make sure that the commitments we've had at the G7 and at the European Union amount to something.
J'en profite aussi pour vous demander.
I'd also like to take the opportunity to ask you to develop upon another one of the recommendations, the following. In the establishment of a coordinated approach by states to promote due diligence in terms of human rights, whilst committing to improving and coordinating, reducing the risk for companies that are working in these difficult fields or doing procurement in these fields. End of quote. So do you think that we should go further with what we're doing here in Canada, and should we have a company ombudsman?
Thank you very much for the question. Human rights due diligence is exceptionally important, I think, particularly as we move towards an increasingly interconnected global economy. Unfortunately, in China, any due diligence, let alone human rights due diligence, is very difficult to perform. In fact, the consensus of human rights experts is that human rights due diligence in the Uyghur region is impossible to perform for the simple reason that it isn't possible to take somebody who is Uyghur out of a factory and interview them freely with them speaking freely. In fact, they would probably suffer reprisals if they were to tell you about the conditions in the factory. So basic human rights due diligence simply isn't possible in the Uyghur region. Yet, many, many big multinational companies continue to source from that region, knowing that that human rights due diligence is not possible. I think what this tells us is that our human rights due diligence protocol are not up to scratch. They don't work. And you can see from a number of examples recently of companies withdrawing from Xinjiang that there is an acknowledgement that it's becoming more and more difficult. A very good example, this isn't to do with human rights, but a German due diligence firm was just imprisoned the other day. And they were imprisoned because China had accused them of espionage, which is something which happens routinely. The reality is they didn't like them digging around in the detail. Well, that's the job of people doing due diligence. So if they're not able to do it in China, we need to ask ourselves some very serious questions about how we can continue to source from that region. Thank you.
40 seconds remaining.
Ben justement, parlant de l'espionnage.
Speaking of espionage, we heard from a professor who was a specialist, Charles Burton, on the Chinese-related questions, and he said that these tariffs could increase interference because we know that Beijing likes to collect data. Electric Mobility Canada said that we know that there is Chinese espionage in Canadian research centres. Could you speak further to these concerns?
Thank you for the question. I think one of the most important things is to ensure that we don't end up stigmatizing all Chinese people because of the behavior of the Chinese state. That would be a mistake, and we don't want to lurch into McCarthyism around this. However, it is true that through the United Front Work Department and through many other overseas Chinese organizations, there is penetration and infiltration of many layers of our economies, and that includes the Canadian economy, has been well demonstrated by your inquiry into interference. So very unfortunately, I think that we are at a stage now where we have to take our due diligence extremely seriously, and where we would recommend that it is not safe, sadly, to allow certain nationals to participate in sensitive research projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 6 minutes, Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being present with us today. Listen, it's incredibly important, the work you're doing, and I think Canadians right now in particular are at a position where they're both combating the reality that we have a severe vulnerability, both in our supply chain management. We've seen that particularly throughout COVID, but now we're seeing that manifested across the globe, and we're finding ourselves a stage back, maybe a place behind, particularly when it comes to some of the extreme dependencies that was mentioned by Mr. Pulford. Mr. Beckett, we reviewed your report, and there's some serious and extreme instances here that I think Canadians in our committee would do well to understand more about. One of the key findings you discover in your report relates to this issue, and maybe it may be oversimplifying, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Canadian goods, let's say they're weapons, parts of weapons, important critical components. Let's say Russia wants them. Hong Kong is being used as a particular port of entry for these markets, even against sanctions that would prohibit particular goods that Canadians make from entering these kinds of illicit regimes. Can you walk us through how something like that could take place given Canada's existing sanction regime?
So there's a number of ways that this can happen. And I think it's important also to start, there's different types of goods here. There's been a lot of press around, say, a company like Texas Instruments that has very, very cheap, calculator parts, right? They're important for military goods, but they're very difficult to control. And then there's a separate category, one that I spoke about in the introduction, like VectorWave, that makes highly specialized, very, very expensive chips, or something more in the middle, like NVIDIA, that makes relatively expensive chips, relatively rare, but very important for these advanced type machines. I think those more specialized categories are the ones that are best to focus on. And what's happening, right? So you're not shipping directly to Russia from Canada, or from the United States or from Europe, these things. They're shipping elsewhere, and often not actually to Hong Kong. Hong Kong doesn't release and there's no way to access their customs records, so we don't know exactly where they're coming from. But they might be in several different places going around the world. And I think what's important here is that certain companies have made clear that unless governments crack down on them and essentially take steps to deter and enforce against them, they're not going to do anything. Recently, NVIDIA's leadership gave an example that, well, if the speed limit is 75 and we're going 65, then we're not breaking the law and we're going to do it. That was in reference to them sending extremely advanced GPUs to China that China is then using to advance their AI. And that's, I think, the attitude that you're getting from a lot of business in North America, in Europe, is if you guys don't stop us from doing this, we're going to do it to the extent that we're able to do it. And right now, what that means is that Canadian companies, American companies, they can send their goods to different places. They can do a few check marks. There was a great example we talk about in our report of a New York company that asked through email a man, a Russian citizen who was based in Hong Kong, to confirm that he didn't plan to send their advanced technology to Russia, He wrote in an email, "I will not send this to Russia," and so they sent him a bunch of OLED scopes that can be used in, or OLED displays that can be used in scopes for weapons. So there's that kind of example. They're going to do the minimum. So there needs to be increases on due diligence requirements, enforcement against those who sort of put their head in the sand like ostriches and don't do what they're supposed to do when it comes to really making sure that none of that their supply chains are and their distributors are doing what they're supposed to do.
And I think that's part of the issue that you're describing here, I think, is this network, this massive and quite sophisticated network, I'd suggest, that really relies on the prior infrastructure that Hong Kong and I'd say many of Western democratic states really included or supported or created. And so this familiarity perhaps has created, maybe in better terms, some vulnerability.
I think that's right. Hong Kong, and it's not the only place in the world that's like this, but in Hong Kong, you can create a company in 24 hours, 48 hours. You can dissolve a company almost as quickly, and that's what's happening here. And as I emphasized in the introduction, a big problem here with Western sanctions is the speed at which they're done. When it takes months to sanction a company, to investigate and sanction a company, by the time, we've seen it multiple times, where a company gets sanctioned and that company no longer exists. Because they've already switched over to something else. Sanctions are way too slow.
So it's like trying to dodge a truck coming from 100 miles away.
Yeah, and Hong Kong is always, before it went rogue and moved away from the West, it's always been a place where you could do that. I think it was a lot more focused on criminal organizations and things like that. So that infrastructure that was friendly towards criminal organizations that wanted to hide their assets, now it's being used for a more political purpose.
Have you sent this report? Have you sent this report in particular to the government, any government officials in Canada, and how they responded?
It's been I wasn't up here, but some of our team from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation did come up and has spoken to officials here, and that led to this hearing. We understand that it was received very well. I think they're from all parties, from all sides of the debate. There is concern in Canada, and we appreciate that, and we're happy to work with the government and with this Parliament on trying to implement some of these.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. I just want to build on what my colleague had been speaking with Mr. Beckett about. I mean, Mr. Beckett, you had mentioned in your testimony the administration of Hong Kong, you've said, essentially has gone rogue now on using the territory to essentially float the sanctions. I mean, you've prepared this report. I mean, do we have any Canada-specific numbers as to how much these sanctions, a dollar total in terms of what is being, circumvented by being sent through places like China, Hong Kong, essentially?
Do you mean for Canadian companies that are exporting and their goods ending up? We don't have numbers for that, and that's not public information, because if it goes through these multiple different countries. Interestingly, one reason that we can do a lot of this work on Russia is because Russia releases a lot more customs information than most places do. And that's why we have that what ultimately arrives in Russia. What we do know about Canada is that they're pretty high on the list of suspicious activity reports from financial firms for Russia sanctions evasion, which suggests that there is some sort of need to do more enforcement and more investigation into numbers that we don't have.
Follow up that notion of, you speak of secondary sanctions and that concern of Canada being high on these lists now with in terms of sanction evaders, and you speak to the need for quicker investigative methods, and we're right now that sanctions are too slow. How is it that we can improve our investigative methods to bring about a quicker resolution? Because you're saying by the time sometimes government acts, these companies are already closed. Is it CBSA? Is it the RCMP? Is it FINTRAC? Like, are they working together? How is it that we can get a coordinated approach to kind of tackle this issue of sanction evasion?
Look, and part of what we've done, particularly since releasing this report, is meeting with investigative agencies, and what we hear sort of routinely is there's a need to strip away bureaucracy, to make sure that you need to have approvals, you need to reach a certain level of an evidentiary standard, but to make sure that that stays within people that are able to do this quickly and understand what's going on, and that I think comes down to really, letting these agencies do their job without having to get this held up in a lot of review and things like that. There's also just a need, frankly, for more budget and more people to be able to investigate these things. We've done, at this point, more work with U.S. government on this than Canadian government with understanding the weeds of that. But to give an example here from the U.S. side, on Russia sanctions evasion, the organization BIS that is responsible for investigating these things only has a very, very small number of people that are able to investigate this. Having done this ourselves in a private capacity outside of the government, it takes many months to pull together even a few names and pull together the evidence on them. So it shouldn't be 2, 3, 4 people who are in the government investigating these things. It should be dozens or more. There are hundreds of companies in Hong Kong alone, much less China, much less the Middle East autocracies there, that have filled up these holes and are filling the void and reshipping these things.
Mr. DePulford, you had talked about a coordinated approach in responding to China. Now, what changes in trade agreements or policies would most effectively counteract China's unethical practices, such as forced labor and environmentally harmful waste disposal?
Thank you very much indeed for the question. Well, I think that what we can do, and what we've still yet to do in a really meaningful way, is ensure that plurilateral trade agreements have very meaningful commitments to human rights due diligence. I give you an example. Right now, the CPTPP does contain quite extensive provisions around labor. It's got quite high labor standards, but in practice, they don't mean very much because more or less you can join that agreement if the members say you can. So the assumption had always been, well, China will never be able to join the CPTPP. Their labor standards are way too low. But the reality is realpolitik. They'll be able to join if the members say that they can. So I think that ensuring that there are non-negotiable principles around shared values, around human rights and due diligence in supply chains would be a very good start. But there's much more that we can do. I think there should be coordinated reduction of dependency upon China, not just unilateral, not just Canada saying we're too dependent. We need democratic nations to come together and say, well, we've got this common problem, so let's find a common solution. If it requires us to pool our resources in order to seed alternate markets, let's do that, for example. But it's going to be much easier dealt with together than on our own.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fortier, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being with us here today to support us in this very important study. It's important for the committee and for the government. So, in your opening statements, you mentioned this, but I'd like you to have you say it again on the record to hear your perspective on the following question. To what extent does the import of Chinese EVs, Canadian technology coming from China, pose a threat to Canada's national security? And secondly, for the privacy of Canadians' data. So I will begin with Mr. Pulford and then followed by Mr. Bickett.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say in 2 ways. First of all, through what people call cellular modules, or CIMs, which, because they require software updates from the manufacturers, are susceptible to remote manipulation. There have been a number of reports, sadly, about remote access and remote manipulation of Chinese-made cellular modules in electric vehicles, including one in the United Kingdom that was in a ministerial car, which was bugged as a result. So these are really very important national security implications around this. In addition to that, a key point about data transfer. In the European Union, we have the Global Data Protection Regulations, GDPR. And the reality of that situation is that it doesn't really save us when it comes to data transfer to China. The reason being that it's still possible for any company to transfer to any partner company in China if they have contracts with each other, and there are certain clauses in those contracts. And those clauses say, we will, of course, protect people's data. But they don't, and they can't. And the reason they can't is that in China, the Intelligence Security Law of 2017 and a number of other pieces of legislation require every Chinese company to hand over data upon request and to deny that such a request has happened if they are asked. So from a data protection point of view, that means that your data can be legally transferred to China and that the state may have access to it, and you will never know, and the company is not permitted to tell you by law. Thank you.
Merci. Monsieur Bickett, voulez-vous...
Thank you. Mr. Bickett, would you like to add to what was already said?
Sure. I think, really to emphasize here, you'll hear from Chinese companies, and even, we see this with companies like TikTok, which are technically based in Singapore, assuring that they don't want to turn over Canadians' information. They don't want to violate people's privacy. They want to work with you on these things. And frankly, a lot of times they're telling the truth. These are guys who are capitalists and they want to make money. But what they won't tell you is that they don't have a choice in the matter. If they are operating out of China, if they are a Chinese company, if they have connections to China, even if they're based internationally officially, if they are asked for personal information, they will provide it. If they are told in a dispute, in a war, or anything like that, to trigger problems with their technology across the world to attack infrastructure, they will have to do it. All of these things are major national security concerns, and I think that Canada and the West, we've long benefited from free markets, and that has been a very helpful thing to the world, but we can't do that at the expense of national security, and there needs to be a much clearer-eyed view of what's going on here.
Thank you. And Mr. Bickett, vous avez parlé de sanctions.
You talked about sanctions earlier. Other than the sanctions that you shared, that being the fact that Canada has already implemented tariffs, are there any other measures that Canada could implement or could implement with its partners against China?
There are a number of them, but the one that I'll really emphasize today, I'll emphasize two. First, human rights sanctions. The United States has sanctioned a number of officials in Hong Kong, in particular, for their crackdown on the democracy movement there. I was a political prisoner, and I was a political prisoner for 4 months in Hong Kong. There are still many of my friends and our fellow movement folks over there. About 1,800 people have been political prisoners at last count. And so the U.S. has a program to sanction officials who are involved in eliminating Hong Kong's autonomy, as well as cracking down on democracy and human rights there. We would very much like to see Canada and the EU and Britain join those sanctions to ensure that these officials feel some punishment for that. That's number one. Number two, more with respect to the report here. As I mentioned in the opening statement, Canada now, very recently, as of last year, has changed its laws to allow for secondary sanctions. Previously, in Canada, it was really, with respect to, for example, the Russia sanctions, it was sanctioning Russian companies, Russian individuals, and there would need to be a separate sanctions regime to, for example, sanction Hong Kongers for what they were doing in Russia. That's no longer the case. The law has changed, and so secondary sanctions can be issued. The U.S. has issued some of these, not enough, and we push them very hard on that, the EU as well. We would like to see Canada, and this would be a very easy thing to do, at least catch up to those U.S. and EU sanctions, where investigators there have already completed those secondary sanctions investigations. Canada could join them very easily. We also really would like to see countries like Canada take the lead in pressing your allies to do more on this front.
Thank you very much, Mr. Savard-Tremblay, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd simply like to carry on with the discussion where we left off with Mr. de Pulford. You were talking about your concerns on espionage in the fields of research in EVs and EVs that could be a source of data collection. So how can we protect ourselves from this interference through this type of technology?
Thank you for your question. I would like to emphasize the importance of the work being done in Canada at the moment through your inquiry into interference. What that is doing, it is mapping out in a way that other countries frankly haven't done in an explicit way, the operations and activities of the United Front Work Department. I would want to underline one aspect of the UFWD, the United Front, and it would be this: talent acquisition agencies. These talent acquisition agencies operate all over the world, including in Canada, and their purpose is to try to get Chinese nationals to go back to China, to work sometimes in state-owned industries, but generally speaking, to take their expertise that they've gained in Canada in sometimes sensitive research scenarios and to use it back in China. Those talent acquisition agencies need to be thoroughly investigated and their activities need to be stopped. This is something, unfortunately, we're suffering in many places. That's just one way that we can confront the infiltration and influence operations of the United Front Work Department. Thank you.
You have 50 seconds remaining, please.
Écoutez, vous êtes aussi, étant donné que vous avez des...
You also said that you have members in a lot of different governments throughout the world. Here in Canada, there are no shipments that were seized under the Forced Labor Act, whereas in the United States, only pertaining to Uyghur forced labor, there have been more than $700 million worth of goods, illegal goods, that have been seized. So can you explain this difference here?
Well, I think it might come down to a capacity and political will. The truth is that the legislation that is in place in the United States imposes what they've called a rebuttable presumption. So they presume that things coming from Xinjiang are tainted with forced labor until it's proven otherwise. And that reversal of the burden of proof means that it's really quite easy for US Homeland Security to do quite a lot more to stop the import of those products. So I think it's down to the seriousness with which we take these issues, but it's also down to the strength of the tools that we have. And the legislation that the US has is very much stronger than everywhere else because of the rebuttable presumption.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, please, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to return to Mr. Pulford, if you mind, just to elaborate on a case within your report. Or sorry, Mr. Beckett, a case within your report, if I may quote, in a court decision, U.S. and Hussein Atifi, Ardakani, and Gary Lam, 156, filed in December of 2023. The defendants were charged with crimes related to the procurement of U.S. manufactured dual-use microelectronics for Iran. Ardakani, an Iranian national, and Lam, a resident of Hong Kong and China, allegedly conspired to illegally purchase and export these components to support Iran's drone or UAV program. Through a sophisticated network of front companies, components for UAVs were shipped to Hong Kong before being re-exported to Iran. The suit allegedly involved multiple companies in France, Canada, and China, some aware of the ultimate buyer and some not. My question, Mr. Beckett, is can you expand on the involvement of Canadian companies in this case?
This was a situation that's a pattern for Iran, which is probably the most sophisticated of all of these sort of rogue state actors on these fronts. They've had a long time now to develop their ability to hide their sales of oil and their acquisition of goods for their drone programs, for their missile programs, and they do it very effectively. There have been some leaked, emails and things like that that have given us some insight into this. So the way that works is Iran all over the world has front companies in jurisdictions where they are able to create these through locals, through non-locals who put these together. That includes Canada. Canada is not the biggest center of that, but it is it is used, the U.S. is used quite a bit as well, and being able to trace these companies in places where really beneficial owners are protected can be quite difficult. So the Canadian element there, it's not that this was being run out of Canada. It's that there were front companies set up there, and there would be multiple transfers involved of the cash between different front companies across the world. If they lose a couple of them, they still have a lot more to back it up. So I wouldn't overread the Canadian element into there, but it is certainly something that would be important for the Canadian government to track.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Desjardins. Mr. Genis, I'm trying to get everybody opportunity here, so we have 4 minutes for you and then 4 minutes for Mr. Sidhu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. de Pulford, you spoke in response to my colleague's question about the differences between the American government's relative success stopping products made from forced labor from coming into the United States and Canada's catastrophic failure at preventing products involving forced labor from coming into our country. You mentioned legislative differences between Canada and the United States, and you also mentioned potential issues of capacity. It has always seemed to me, though, that we can address the capacity challenges by having effective alignment among democracies. Of course, you understand that it's difficult to trace origins, that digging into supply chains can be complex. But if we collaborated more effectively with like-minded allies so that we could be sharing information, then we would ease any capacity pressures, and we would ensure that we would be succeeding at the level of our allies. I would like to see a situation where if a shipment is turned away from Seattle because it has products made from forced labor, it can't simply go and dock in Vancouver, that we're benefiting from American experience and know-how and really the bipartisan work that's been done there. I also wonder if this kind of framework for collaboration could be extended to more allies, if we could establish some kind of partnership involving our North American economies, but also Japan, the UK, Europe, etc. What do you think about the possibility of establishing some kind of effective alignment on preventing products made from forced labor from coming into our economies and sharing information in the process?
Thank you for the question. I think it would be long overdue, but the complexity of the task shouldn't be understated. For example, in any phone, you will have literally hundreds, possibly even thousands of sourcing inputs. And for each of those sourcing inputs, you will have a different supply chain or a slightly diverse supply chain. And trying to map out exactly where every single piece of that thing comes from is an extraordinarily complex thing. But companies know how to do it, because otherwise, where do they get those things? So it is very possible.
Yeah. Sorry, if I could just jump in quickly on the complexity piece. I mean, I guess my point would be, if the Americans are doing it, can we not simply make better use of the information they're already gathering, though? It's complicated for someone to do it, but it would seem less complicated to have multiple countries benefiting from the same information than to have everyone doing that work themselves, right?
Thank you very much. Well, I think the point I was making is that if what's so revolutionary about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is it provides that every single thing, that you cannot import anything from there. It's not just a whole phone, it's the bits, it's its constituent parts, and that makes a big difference. But I was coming to address your point. The complexity is not a reason not to do it, and we do have some interesting new tools. For example, with organic materials, there are companies like Oratane. Oratane isn't the only company, but there are companies like Oratane who have isotopic maps of various parts of the world with technology so sensitive that they can take a hair on your head and tell you where you've been over the past 6 months. So any organic material they can test, and they can tell you whether or not it comes from Xinjiang. So we don't need to be doing this all-encompassing thing here. We can spot check companies, and some companies do have contracts with Oratane and other similar organizations. So there are ways around this. I don't believe in the capacity argument. It's a question of political will, but we do have to have the legislative tools. And at the moment, I believe that really only the US does when it comes to Uyghur forced labor.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Sidhu, for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so building on sanctions, I want to mention since 2017, the government has taken significant work to crack down on financial crime, investing close to $320 million since 2019 to strengthen compliance, financial intelligence, information sharing, and investigative capacity to support money laundering investigations, creating new integral money laundering investigative teams in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, which convene experts to advance investigations into money laundering, supported by dedicated forensic and accounting experts. We've also launching a publicly accessible beneficial ownership registry for federal corporations earlier this year on January 22nd. The government continues to call upon provinces and, of course, territories to advance a pan-Canadian approach to beneficial ownership transparency, modernizing Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing framework to adapt to emerging technologies, vulnerable sectors, and growing risks such as sanctions evasions. And of course, establishing public-private partnerships with the financial sector that are improving the detection and disruption of profit-oriented crimes, including human trafficking, online child sexual exploitation, and fentanyl trafficking. In Budget 2024, we take further action to protect Canadians from financial crimes. And I'd like to ask the witnesses here with us today about the anti-money laundering legislation and actions that we put into place and how it's helped address some of the gaps needed against sanctions. Maybe Mr. Pulford, we can start with you. I think you were talking about sanctions, and then we can move on to.
I think of the two witnesses, Mr. Bickett's probably more qualified to address that question, Mrs. Yu.
Sure.
I'm not an expert on Canadian law, but we think that the biggest thing that Canada has done that can potentially address some of the shortfalls in the sanctions program, which I'm very approving of, is revise the law to permit third country sanctions. But again, it hasn't been used yet. And in particular, I think if you're going to address something like a rampant effort by multiple countries to evade Canadian sanctions through trade companies, you're not going to be able to end that by just sanctioning the ultimate beneficiaries of that in Russia, in Iran. You've got to sanction, the evaders. But even that, as we were talking about earlier, is not really going to change that much because they can simply start a new company. They can always find new people to do it. Ultimately, what we would really like to see, what we've been really emphasizing to in Canada, in the United States, and in the EU, is sanctions against some of the infrastructure companies. So in particular, most importantly of all, financial firms. And the new sanctions authority that Canada has given itself allows that to happen, where you've got regional banks in Asia in particular that we know are financing quite a bit of this trade, illicit trade. And if you don't have to sanction Bank of China, right? But if you sanction a smaller regional bank, every other bank will fall in line. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to corporates and financial firms, they will fill the holes and they will push the limits as far as they can. Really, the only way to get them to revise how they're acting is to issue some sanctions, to set a few examples. They will then revise their due diligence programs. They will stop doing the things that they do very quickly. So I guess in short, I would say there's been progress in revising the law, and that's great to see, but we would really encourage more use of the new tools that are available.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. Very much appreciate valuable information today. We will suspend momentarily until our witnesses can come to the table. Thank you. we have with us. My apologies for the delay, but we'll make sure that you get sufficient time to make your points with the committee. We have the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction, Keenan Loomis, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from Cal Tire, we have Corey Parks, the President. Welcome to all. We will start with opening remarks, then proceed with a round of questions. Mr. Loomis, you have up to 5 minutes for your presentation.
Merci, Madam President. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for inviting me to present on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction on this very important topic. Established in 1930, CISC is Canada's voice for the steel construction industry, promoting the use and benefits of steel in construction and supporting the needs of the membership and industry through technical expertise, knowledge transfer, research and development, industry codes and standards, and certification and advocacy. We represent the steel manufacturers, fabricators, suppliers, constructors, engineers, and architects who are building with steel in Canada. Steel is a strong, adaptable material that is sustainable, cost-effective, and resilient, among many other benefits, making it a reliable choice for building Canada's vital infrastructure. I want to begin by commending the federal government for the measures, which were supported by all parties, announced on August 26th. The CISC is supportive of the 25% surtax on imports of steel and aluminum products from China under Section 53 of the Customs Tariff, which we, in conjunction with the Canadian Steel Producers Association, advocated for the government to introduce. Our fabricators are generally supportive of creating a strong domestic steel industry, recognize China as a bad actor in the fabricated steel industry, and most importantly, recognize that it is in our best interest to protect access to and harmonize with our closest trading partner, the United States. However, it must be acknowledged that Canada does not domestically produce all the raw steel that our members need to build in this country. While CISC encourages domestic production, we recognize that at present, our members must have access to outside markets to build the high-rises, hospitals, schools, and bridges our country needs. As much of the steel we buy is from the United States, and because our fabricators do a significant amount of cross-border work, the Department of Finance and other relevant departments must work closely with their U.S. counterparts to support harmonization in our ongoing response to China's unfair trade practices. We also appreciate the government's intentions with the recently announced remedies to support stakeholders facing supply chain shock due to the recently announced tariffs. While these remedies are well-intentioned, we caution the government to be selective in applying remedies to ensure that the objectives of the tariffs are fulfilled and that Canadian domestic materials continue to be prioritized. The remedy application process should require that the supplier operates under the same rules as our domestic suppliers do for any remedies to be granted. While we commend measures introduced thus far on raw Chinese steel, there's more work to be done to support the domestic steel industry and Canada's larger economy against unfair trade practices. The current tariff regime is ambiguous as to the steel that has been melted down and poured in another country, or as it pertains to downstream steel products, which is steel that has been fabricated or, for example, incorporated into our household appliances. Omitting downstream products from the list enables loopholes for bad actors to continue to exploit. Fabrication is the real value add in the steel industry, where our members take raw steel and engineer and craft it for our building purposes, all with safety, quality, sustainability, and cost effectiveness of national infrastructure projects top of mind. This is very engineering intensive, high-tech, and requires skilled labor. Failing to protect Canada from imported fabricated steel products will result in losing this vital skill from our domestic manufacturing knowledge base. We need to protect our Canadian manufacturing industry's ability to build well with steel, to support our infrastructure needs, and to quickly and safely respond to environmental crises, such as the Fraser Valley flooding in 2021, in which steel bridges were rapidly deployed to restore transportation corridors after several bridges were washed out. Our members were among the very first responders in that natural disaster, and as we face many more, we need to continue to have this important domestic capacity. The push to extend the tariffs to downstream products has gained support in the United States as well, with bipartisan Congressional Steel Caucus last month calling on the Department of Commerce to expand Section 232 protections for certain downstream products, including fabricated structural steel. In the interest of continuing to achieve harmonization with the United States and protect this cross-border industry, we should be expanding Section 53 tariffs on the same. To further support the steel industry and the highly skilled engineers and tradespeople that fabricate and innovate our country's steel infrastructure, the CISC recommends that the government establish fabricated in Canada requirements in the construction of all taxpayer-funded and supported manufacturing projects, including those that support the transition to a low-carbon economy, such as EV and battery plants. Our communities receive a 4-time return on investment when we utilize Canadian fabricators to build our infrastructure. The overall economic success of the steel industry, like other sectors of construction, is shaped by the economic boost and opportunities that arise from big projects, particularly government-funded projects. Canadian taxpayer-funded projects should not be awarded to companies purchasing foreign fabricated steel in countries that lack reciprocal procurement policies. Once again, thank you to the committee for inviting me to appear on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Parks, over to you for up to 5 minutes, please.
Parks. I'm the president of Cal Tire, a family-owned Canadian company based in British Columbia. We employ over 4,800 people in Canada, are one of the country's largest independent tire dealers and the largest remanufacturer of truck and bus radial tires, also called TBR tires. Canadian industry and consumers are threatened by the dumping and subsidizing of low-quality, single-use Chinese truck and bus tires. I'm here today to ask you to include the retreading industry in the protections being considered for electric vehicles, aluminum, and steel. I will share some background on our industry, discuss the economic affordability and environmental implications of these unfair trade practices, and ask you to consider the urgent need for action to protect Canadian interests. In 2023, the Canadian tire industry contributed approximately $7.1 billion to the economy. It represents a vital part of our national transportation and supply industries, directly supporting tens of thousands of Canadian jobs and indirectly supporting many others. The truck and bus tire radial market and its associated remanufacturing sector annually contribute $2.3 billion to the economy and are especially important. Remanufacturing of tires, often called retreading, adds a new tread to a used tire casing, extending its lifespan. Retreading has been a well-established and integral component of the transportation sector in Canada for over 70 years. Today, roughly 50% of all truck and bus tires on the road are retreaded tires. Retreaded tires are a popular, sustainable, and cost-effective alternative to new tires, reducing waste and carbon emissions by 70% per tire when compared to new tire production. Further, our experience indicates one quality tire can be retreaded 3 or more times and can cover the same distance as 12 low-cost, low-quality, single-use tires. The retread industry is threatened by waves of low-quality, single-use tires imported from China at prices below the raw material costs of the commodities needed to manufacture them. These tires enter Canada supported by non-market practices, including government subsidies and weaker labor and environmental standards, making it impossible for the domestic industry and tire producers and retread industry to compete. These low-quality single-use tires are poorly made and do not have the structural integrity to effectively and safely accept retreads. As a result, increased tire waste is being sent to Canadian landfills. In short, this unfair competition threatens our domestic industries by depressing prices, discouraging local investment, and filling our landfills with unnecessary waste and risking elimination of thousands of Canadian jobs. If unfairly traded imports of truck and bus tires continue, the retread industry will likely disappear, and Canada's transportation sector will rely on Chinese imports to maintain operations. Ensuring the retreading sector can compete on a level playing field will strengthen our supply chain and help Canada keep its economy independent from foreign economic influence. Our key allies, including the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, have already implemented measures to protect their truck and bus tire manufacturing and retreading industries from unfairly priced Chinese imports. In 2019, the U.S. imposed up to a 90% duty on truck and bus tires manufactured in China. The duty was renewed just this year. Unfortunately, Canada is now the only major Western nation where dumping of these Chinese-manufactured TBR tires still occurs, and it's gaining momentum. To safeguard the Canadian industry, economy, and environment, we urge you to support a 109% surtax on truck and bus tires manufactured in China. This step would promote fair competition, protect thousands of jobs, safeguard our supply chain, and support Canada's environmental goals. Countering unfair trade practices is essential to Canada's economic and environmental well-being and the survival of this industry. I'd like to end with 3 points. 1, Chinese tires are being dumped and subsidized into Canada at prices below the raw material costs needed to make those tires. 2, the growing presence of these tires in Canadian markets is threatening the very existence of the remanufacturing industry in the short term and the stability of the transportation sector in the medium and long term. And finally, Western nations who have implemented duties to stem the dumping and subsidizing of these tires into their countries have returned market stability and fair competition to their domestic tire and transportation industries, ensured a more level market-based economy for these products. Finally, I want to thank you for the invitation to appear before this committee. As a growing independent business in Canada, this is a very intimidating place to find ourselves. However, it's important for each of you to know how much this means to each of the thousands of Canadians that you are interested in hearing about the very real threat these dump tires pose to their jobs, to the tire and transportation industries at large, and to the broader Canadian economy. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
On 6 minutes, Mr. Williams, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Parks, thank you very much for coming in today. This is quite alarming to hear that we have a major industry another industry that's again threatened by China and its mercantilism, unfair practices. So just tell us again, how big is this industry? How many jobs are there? And what's happening right now from China?
The industry is quite large. Overall, the tire industry is about $7.1 billion here in Canada. The TBR business is only about $2.3 billion of that, but they're related industries. You kind of have to have one to service the other. So businesses like ours have a passenger and light truck business and a commercial business. And the commercial business is a relatively low margin business compared to the more dynamic consumer business. And so when you harm materially the truck and bus side of the business, you harm the entire industry. And so we think that the import of these tires is driving, we know that it's driving our remanufacturing ability down to almost to a break-even scenario where we're closing plants or we're talking about closing additional plants. We know that the vast majority of the people in this business, we're about 300,000 of 1.2 million tires manufactured annually. The vast majority of them are mom and pop shops that are selling these tires against tires that are frankly far below the raw material cost. So we think it's a very real threat, not just to our business, but to the entire industry that represents tire manufacturing.
So in terms of these tires, they're coming in, they're cheaper, correct?
They are.
Are they as safe as the tires that you make currently?
You know, without the data, we can't tell you they're inherently less safe. I can tell you that they're made with a smaller, what we call a belt package. When we break these tires down to try to retread them, they cannot safely hold a retreaded tire. So these tires are not tires you would stick on the steer axle of a vehicle because they're lightweight, poorly manufactured. The heavier duty premium tires go on the steer axle, so they put these on trailers where they can fail and not have an accident. But they do fail at an alarming rate compared to a high-quality tire. That part we do know.
And they end up probably in landfills more often, correct?
They do. We have tried repeatedly to retread these tires. They're not retreadable, not safely retreadable. So largely we view these as disposable tires in our market.
So when we look at cheaper tires, you know, we've been studying Chinese steel, and aluminum, and then, of course, EVs we're studying on these batteries. When these tires are dumped into the market, are these taking away Canadian jobs? And you're seeing this in the industry threaten? Is it threatening the jobs in the tire industry, the $7 billion tire industry?
We've seen a dramatic increase in the dumping of these tires in 2023 as we were coming out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, we didn't have a whole lot of shipments coming from China because the cost of a C-can was in $25,000, $35,000 range. Now it's back to a normal price. These tires are being dumped into our markets. We are not able to compete against those. We don't carry these tires. They're often dropped off to brokers and sold off the back of trucks. They're sold to both Canadian industry and to the U.S. industry. So trans-border shippers will come to Canada, buy these cheap tires they can't buy in the U.S. and head back. We know that because when they show up at our shops to have their tires repaired, these are tires that we don't sell, that are banned in the U.S.
So we talk about ban in the U.S. Has the U.S. and other nations banned this, put a tariff on it, ensured that there's a measure to counter the tire dumping?
As I mentioned, depending on where the tires are made, so when the U.S. went through the ITC process, they ended up with these tariffs that range from, I can't remember the low end, but the top end 90% tariffs based on the dumping and the findings they had regarding the cost of these tires versus the sale price into the U.S.
And have you approached the Canadian government? And if so, what's the response been so far?
Well, this will mark our third time here in Ottawa after 70 years of not being here at all. So yes, I would say we've approached a variety of MPs to try to at least make this position known, so that we can go on record and try to protect. I mean, it's a very emotional issue for our company. We have folks that have really good careers both in the retreading business and in the tire repair and installation business, and they see this business shrinking in a way that they can't fairly compete. So we've tried to share that with the government as best we can to try to make it aware, and at this particular moment in time, trying to get ourselves into this most recent study so that you can see what the U.S. has seen, the European Union and others have found, which is these tires are being absolutely dumped into Canada.
So you'd like to see the government put the 109% tariff on. Again, same questions we've asked in the EV study in Chinese steel. Are the tires being made there made with forced labor? Is it uncompetitive? Are they fully subsidized? Is it uncompetitive?
It's certainly uncompetitive. We don't have any particular knowledge of the forced labor issue. We're aware of a very particular study that came out of that was summarized in a New York Times article, a data study that they summarized regarding forced labor, specifically related to tires out of China. So that we're aware of. We don't have any of our own internal knowledge. I'd leave that to others to determine. But there's no way that these tires can be made at $141 a piece, what they're currently being sold into Canada at. It's impossible to reach that price point with just the base commodity prices that we know everyone in the world is paying. You look at steel, natural rubber, carbon black, and oil, those two things, you add up how much it takes to make a tire, you can't make it for $141.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan, please.
For your testimony and your commitment to both your industries. They're both remarkable. I usually don't make predictions, but in 8 days, the United States is going to have a new president, regardless. So how important was it for us to work so closely with the United States, our number one trading partner, and putting 100% on the EV cars, as well as the 25% on steel and aluminum? And I'll start with Mr. Loomis first.
Thank you, It is imperative. It is everything for us as a domestic industry. We don't do a lot of fabrication outside of North America. So the U.S. is, besides our own domestic market, is our biggest market by far. And so we want to maintain access to that market. We get a lot of steel from that market as well, brought into Canada on our projects. And so for us, we want to ensure that the Americans have confidence that that we're harmonized when it comes to trade, and that we're not a backdoor as well for Chinese steel. Again, the tariffs caused certainly a price increase for our members. We buy the raw steel on the global market, and of course tariffs imposed by our American counterparts did increase the price of steel. Tariffs on Canadian steel also did, not as much, obviously, because it's not as big a market. But we understand that and we accept that, because for us, the most important thing, we're willing to pay a premium to continue to maintain access to the American market.
Drill down a little bit before I turn it over to Mr. Parks. Do you work with coterminous associations in the United States, steel associations, and what kind of work do you do there?
Yes, we do. We have good relationships with our counterparts in the U.S., the AISC, the American Institute of Steel Construction. And we do a lot of the standards development work that in both of our countries. So that's primarily been our purpose. That was our whole reason for being, is to create the standards for building with steel in this country. As an organization, we're expanding into advocacy for sure, and working with our American counterparts For them, as you have to imagine, it's harder to get their attention, and it's harder for them to understand how important the Canadian market is. But we certainly want to push this Fortress North America type of agenda with our American counterparts, if they'll listen and pay attention to what we have to say here in Canada.
Mr. Parks, can you answer that question too about the integration of the market, I suppose, between the United States and Canada and your industry? And obviously, you are proposing a bumper-to-bumper approach, almost, if you will, on tariffs. So, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, we are proposing that. We think the harmonization of the tariffs is pretty critical. Sorry. More to say?
No, I'm listening intently.
Okay. We believe that the harmonization of the tariffs is fairly important. There's very little domestic production of tires here in Canada. There are a couple Michelin plants in Atlantic Canada that we're familiar with. The majority of their product gets exported back to the U.S. So most of our tires here in Canada on the truck and bus side come from the U.S. or from Asian markets. For 70 years, you've seen a lot of discipline in that market, or at least the 70 years we've been around, where the pricing, it goes up and down in terms of where it makes the most sense to make product. But we've never ever seen something that is sold so far below the raw material costs that we can't even compete. We can't retool our factories. We can't invest. We won't invest in retooling these production lines when we can't even get into the ballgame on the raw material costs. So in terms of our work with the U.S., it has been very light here at Cal Tire. What I can tell you is that the Americans have a tremendous advantage when it comes to putting the tariffs in through the normal World Trade Organization process. And that advantage is the United Steelworkers. So the manufacturers of these tires are very unwilling to sit at the table and push for these tariffs when they have manufacturing that is not being subsidized in these markets, in the China's market, where they're making other products beyond tires. Michelin and Goodyear make things beyond tires. So in the U.S., the United Steelworkers were the ones that brought the petition and could get into the process. That's an impossible task almost for us in our industry because it's such a collection of smaller businesses. We see ourselves as a small business. We know we're not small, but we're the largest player by a long ways in Canada in this market, and we can't get ourselves in front of that commission without a lot of work to try to find our way there, which is what led us to you here at this hearing.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Oh, thank you very much. I guess one of the questions that I continually ask is we've heard a lot about the labor practices, forced labor, including environmental, the difference in the making both the steel and the tires in China. Is it? I know the steel, but are the tires a dirty process too? I'll call it over in China.
If you compare the environmental impact of a new tire versus a retread tire, it's about a 70% difference, right? Because when you make a new tire, you have to make the casing and then you put the tread on it. What we do in the retreading process is buff off the old tread and put new tread on it. It's a much lighter environmental impact. You add to that the Chinese tire that's being disposed of because when you try to buff it off, it won't hold a retread. So they're disposable tires, and we see that all over the place in our retread plants where these tires are coming in, customers are asking them to be retreaded, and we said, we can't. You bought a disposable tire, off it goes to the landfill. On top of all that, if I could add, because they're not being sold through the normal commerce chain where the government collects a recycle fee to pay for that, they're being sold from brokers and off the back of trucks and off of docks. When they get disposed of, they're just being dumped. They're not being paid for to have that recycle process take place.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parks.
Very
on to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your opening statements. My question will be for Mr. Loomis. We know that the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction, as well as the Aluminum Association, on August 26th made a statement following the announcement of Canadian tariffs, and they said that this would allow an entry point for high carbon intensity steel and aluminum that comes from unfair trade. So in Canada, there are 18 anti-dumping tariffs against China for raw steel. 56% of all trade files of Canada are on China, or related to China, rather. Despite this, despite the high number of anti-dumping cases coming from China, this market is soaring, and it doubled on the Canadian market in recent years. So what is not working in our dispute system, our trade dispute system?
Well, I think you heard, thank you for your question, first of all. I think you heard from the Canadian Steel Producers Association when they gave testimony not too long ago that the trade remedy system is broken. And so that is certainly one of the issues that we are finding. And even if you have a clear case to bring a trade case, you have to think long and hard before doing so because of the length of time and the amount of money required to be able to enforce your WTO rights. So I think, you know, the big thing here is that, you know, just as my colleague is facing, it is really easy, of course, to go to the bottom line and to talk about price and, you know, what we are trying to sound the alarm on is that, you know, that also there's a huge risk there too when it comes to quality. And so the big issue for us is if these tariffs are in place and then the price issue is kind of equalized, we will have we'll be able to make much higher quality decisions when it comes to the purchasing of steel. Again, referring to my colleague, I have had members of mine say that when they bid on a project, and you know, we're not even talking publicly funded projects, but you know, like an oil sands project, for example, in northern Alberta, even if they zero out their labor, they're not able to compete on price. And so that's the issue here is that it's far too easy, and the bottom line is controlling our decision making far too much in this industry.
Cela dit, puis on le sait qu'il va y avoir.
So that being said, we know that there will be a CUSMA review next year. So I have a question on that briefly, but we also know that the Americans correctly have underlined the fact that Canada is the backdoor entry place for many products that shouldn't be entering into the North American market. Do you agree with this statement, and what should we do more to fight against this?
I think the proof behind us being a backdoor is circumstantial and doesn't necessarily align with what we're seeing in terms of the declarations that are being made at our ports of entry. So while there is concern that we are being used as a backdoor, this is the importance behind harmonization, especially at all levels, whether go border control, you know, to again. You know, insisting on domestic steel and fabrication being used in large infrastructure projects, we need to assure the Americans. They have to have confidence that we are not the end run for Chinese steel. I think one of the things that we should be doing in the lead up to CUSMA, and I would, you know, say that we should be looking at this as well, is how much Mexico is the end run, the backdoor for Chinese steel. And I think that it would behoove us to do a study with our counterparts in the U.S. to identify that particular problem, because the evidence and the, you know, it is far greater that it is Mexico that is being used as a dumping ground for Chinese steel into the U.S. market. So we should be looking at that and again tightening up and making sure that we are completely harmonized with our American counterparts so that they have complete confidence in us.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Desjardins, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being present with us today. It's an important study that we're undertaking related to steel, of course. Those many Canadians who are involved in this, whether they're employers at a shop level or whether they're executives, this is an issue that I think that's pertinent to industries across the country. Because of the immense issue present by China and their extreme steel dumping and aluminum dumping here, there's actions that have largely been undertaken. That's why you're here today. The minister came out equalizing some of these tariffs with our American counterparts to ensure that much of the steel industry here is protected. Mr. Loomis, you mentioned that part of your association's goal is to encourage domestic production of steel, which is, of course, good. We want to see more of that. That would probably solve many of the issues that you're actually explaining right now if we had more domestic production. U.S. partnership and harmonization there, I think that's an encouraging path forward for both Canadians who have a huge dependency on those markets, but also our contractors who depend on those stabilizing prices to build. And also the supply chain shock issues. That one I think is interesting to me, and I want to explore that with you in terms of how the supply chain has been shocked by this. Of course, producers or those who utilize steel are reeling, both those who are purchasing them domestically, whether that's steel domestically, or has a former arrangement with Chinese steel, for example. How are they impacted is part of my line of questioning in terms of how we create more resilience there for those persons. So more recently, the Minister of Finance had mentioned that in light of all this on October 15th, that she may consider some tariff relief for some industries. Do you support the exemption for certain industries?
Certainly, if China is the only place that makes a certain type of steel that we must utilize here in this country, I can't tell you what that is. But certainly that would be a case in which we should proceed cautiously. But for the most part, I doubt that that is the case. So I'm not too concerned about that. I haven't heard from any of my members saying that there's a particular type of steel that we must be concerned about when we do deal with China. So at this point in time, I can't point out anything. There is obviously a very large global market for the production of steel. Besides China, a lot of Asian markets and others. And we, our members, they are fairly agnostic as to where the steel comes from. Again, we would love to be able to buy domestic steel, but we don't make I-beams in this country, for example. And so we must go overseas. And of course that,
Largely, to the question, you largely would support, in this case, you would support targeted exemptions to that argument. There has to be an intersection between what you're saying and the fact that your producers are telling you they're having supply chain shocks. So it's likely, to me, or at least I would assume, the Minister of Finance took issue with the fact that there be supply chain shocks and has perhaps tried to shore up some of these industries in terms of building confidence. So has, on the 15th, suggested that there be targeted exemptions for some producers on steel and aluminum. So those two things seem to make sense in my mind with what you're saying and what the minister is saying. So I'll ask the question. So do you support those exemptions then?
Yes. I can't tell you exactly, what types of products we're talking about, but sure.
So there has to be some room in our trade economy here to look at those industries, to provide some relief. But I guess what's the next step then? So what is the next step in reducing that dependency if we're going to have targeted exemptions, which, to your point, will actually not get us in closer alignment with our American counterparts? But is there a point that you'd recommend where we say no one gets any more exemptions? Here's a process to build forward? Or is that process to you in the industry void and vacant of a future? You're just going to go along with the ride until we see where the market lands?
If there are other markets that produce steel, then all the better. And then, we can certainly target China for the reasons why we must, right? It is a non...
Producers are exploring.
Totally.
Yeah. Good to know. So I guess the second question I have now is, given the fact that there's been this move by Canada to look at very well-meaning tariffs to protect our industry here, do you anticipate any malicious or international retaliatory tariffs?
I think we've already seen that on other commodities that we produce here in this country. And, I was informed by one of my Alberta members that, many of the fabricators there, have close relationships in the canola industry, for example, and so at the Thanksgiving table, their brother, who's a farmer, who has been impacted by retaliatory tariffs. So it's a far more nuanced view, for example, out west as it might be out east. I'm 6 months into this role. I'm finding that there are all kinds of incredible regional differences among the membership. Folks are feeling it certainly out west when it does extend to commodities that are also being produced within their jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, you're down to 20 seconds. To the members, I'm going to try and get a round two in since we were delayed at the beginning if possible. So I've kind of slightly reduced the time so that everybody gets another round. If that's okay, Mr. Martel, please, for 4 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll jump right in since we don't have much time. Mr. Parks, my first question is for you. I'd like to know the impact of Chinese dumping on the competitiveness of Cal Tire and the tire industry in Canada.
Well, I think thank you for the question. The competitiveness of our industry relies on the ability to make enough money to support our people and the programs that we have around them. And when we are faced with these tires where we cannot go into a logging yard or into a trucking facility and compete, we can't get within a couple $100 of the price that they're buying these spot Chinese cheap tires on, we can't compete at all. So what we do is we try to emphasize the service aspect of it, because the product now is a throwaway. So what can we do to fix your vehicle, to sometimes install the tires for them, or do repairs on other things on their vehicle, as opposed to being able to have the product be part of the sales process.
So, Mr. Parks, currently you're able to survive without any firm measures being implemented by our government. I'd like to know, what's the risk for the Canadian industry in the long term if we're not implementing any measures? Can we carry on long term without strong measures in this industry?
I would argue we can't survive in the long term without strong measures in this industry, and I would point to a couple reasons for that. One, your comment that we are surviving is probably accurate. We are barely surviving. We are operating many of these retread plants at below cost. We are losing money on every tire we sell because we're trying to get in and make money on the service piece. That is not sustainable in the long term. To your other question about what's the long and medium term impact to the industry, I think it's very significant. We happen to have we have 290 stores across Canada, coast to coast. We are in many, many small towns and jurisdictions where you would not normally have a tire business there, but we are able to do it because there's a small passenger and light truck business, and there's a bustling natural resource industry, whether it be forest products, mining, you name it. And so in the absence of being able to compete, some of those stores risk closure. And you start to close those stores over the long term, that's a material impact to the industry, and I think to the transportation industry at large. And I might just add one last thing. Every bit of the steel that we're talking about in this conversation is being moved from the plant to its final destination on these exact tires.
1 minute, oui. Monsieur Parks, c'est quoi le stratégie?
Mr. Parks, what is Cal Tire's strategy to ensure sustainability and ethics in its supply chains, especially up against this type of threat?
We try to emphasize what it is we do best. On the one hand, it's service, so we emphasize that piece as part of our strategy. The other is we are the only manufacturer and retreader in Canada that's taking retreaded tires, using the buffings, putting them to Canada's only tire-derived polymer plant, which recycles that material and puts it back into the supply chain. So we think that's good citizen standards that we apply to. So our ethics are around being good, sustainable corporate citizens.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miao for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witness for being here today. Mr. Parks, I'd like to ask if you can share more about the process of retreading those tires, because you mentioned how it's more sustainable compared to any other tires, especially the ones that is being imported by China.
I sure can. So a company buys a brand new tire. It's generally it can be a entry level, a medium, or a premium tire, but it's a tire with a good casing that is built with typical standards. They run that tire until it has end of its tread life. They then send it to us. We bring it in. There's a very complicated process to inspect it to make sure there's no damage to now what is called the casing, and then we put it into a buffer, and it buffs off all this machine buffs off all the old tread. You put some gum rubber around it, you stick a new tread on it, you seal it, and you bake it for a couple of hours to make it into a new tire. Then it comes back, it goes through another inspection process. You can do that. You can theoretically do that into perpetuity, but we generally retread 3 times on average. You can retread it up to 5 times. Some companies do it unlimited, but it all depends on the quality of the casing and if there's been any damage to it during its life.
Does this apply to only commercial vehicle or also passenger and light trucks vehicles?
In North America right now, it only applies to commercial tires. When we were all younger people, retreaded tires on passenger was made more sense and was economically viable. Since the late 1990s, early 2000s, very little passenger retreading goes on because there's not enough material in the product to make it make sense to put the labor on top of it to retread it, where a truck tire has an enormous amount of steel, a lot of rubber, a lot of technology, frankly, in the bead that goes in that tire that make it that's why they cost so much money, is because there's a lot that goes into it. Makes sense to retread.
So what will be the difference between electric vehicle tires compared to a regular gas vehicle, and in the sense of commercial side, if we are moving toward that transition?
Maybe you can help me. I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
So let's. My understanding is electric vehicle have a different type of tire that they use due to the grip, and gas vehicle has the tires that we've been using.
Correct. So it's not necessarily a different type of tire. It's maybe a heavier construction. So because of the torque on electric vehicles, it burns the rubber a lot quicker, and you can actually peel the tread off of the casing with that much torque, and so you have to have a very quality tire to put on those vehicles. We have not seen what the hypothetical truck tire, new electric truck tire would look like yet. At least I don't have any knowledge of what that would look like specifically, but generally electric vehicles require a more quality, heavier built technological tire, and that's what the Michelins and the Goodyears and the Bridgestones spend a lot of time doing, is working on the technology.
Earlier you mentioned about tire dumping, and can you tell us what approach the U.S. is actually taking in regards to these disposable or single-use tire dumping?
Well, the U.S., unlike Canada, the U.S. does not have a regime for recycling that's anywhere near as robust as it is here in Canada. Here, it's very much you pay a good amount on the purchase of a tire to pay for the recycling, and the recycling is run by contracts that the government has. In the U.S., it's all done privately, so there's very little done on just general recycling. But because of the tariffs, the U.S. doesn't have disposable tires the same way we do here. I spent a good part of my career in the U.S. working on this very same issue for an almost identical company, and we did not have this issue of tires being dumped in there after 2019.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2 minutes.
Oui, si vous voulez bien, Monsieur Lou.
Yes, Mr. Loomis. we can carry on with the question that I want to ask you concerning the CUSMA review. Do you have any recommendations for Ottawa? And what issues require more representation? Because we do know that this review is coming very soon, next year.
We were happy, frankly, to get out of the CUSMA negotiation fairly wholly. It could have been so much worse. So in that regard, I think the government did a really good job, was very deft in negotiating with a difficult negotiator. We will see, obviously, in a couple of weeks who we are facing. I think generally we would like to do no harm. And so that would be, and to, again, maintain our access to the U.S. market. So that's the important thing for me. And then I think as well, we do need to be looking at the other partner in that tripartite agreement, and whether things have changed. We, the Canadian government, were very much, there was very little daylight between us and Mexico because of the interesting aspects of negotiating that deal. I think this is going to be different this time around. I think we definitely should be working with the U.S. to understand the impacts of Chinese investment in Mexico that has undermined a lot of the agreement that is CUSMA.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to continue on that frame, you've mentioned it several times now, that Canada is not the bad guy here. It has to be Mexico. This is something that occurs often, I'd say, in committees, various committees, not particularly this committee, but in other committees where we see that attempt to maybe obfuscate. I don't want to attribute negative malice, but to move what is our issue here. There is domestic steel production issues, both dumping from foreign enterprises into Canada. We have weaker safeguards than our American counterparts, and that's a fact that's true. But you're also mentioning a very important fact that in addition to Canada's vulnerabilities, Mexico is hyper volatile in the action of disrupting our stability for supply chain security for steel manufacturers here. Can you explain what you mean when you say the investments into Mexico? Are you talking about investments into capital projects, or investments into innovation and science technology, or innovation into supply chain resiliency, for example? Where is that investment, and how is it into Mexico, and how is it damaging Canadian steel producers, or steel users and manufacturers and producers?
My understanding is that there's a lot of Chinese investment into buying Mexican companies, and thus, using that ability now to be able to circumvent some of the rules, or or be the kind of
are they a front company? Are they a front? In many ways, we've heard about that in this committee many times, where there's these companies, shell companies almost, where they'd be in a jurisdiction in order to just process material, or are you talking about investments in real factory goods, like manufacturing and production tools?
Brief answers,
yeah,
sir.
No, I'm probably out of my depth a little bit here. I would like to ask the previous speakers because they're much better at being China watchers for sure, and China analysts. I should probably not go any further.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Williams, for 4 minutes, please, and then Mr. Aria.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Mr. Parks, I must say I'm very alarmed today by your testimony. It does seem that, we have a significant risk to the nation's tire industry, a big industry with thousands of jobs. It seems that every other G7 nation has gotten top of this. This seems to be something that's gone below the radar. I do want to talk just quickly on competition in your industry. So this is obviously having a major effect. In the last 9 years, has your industry also found other rising costs that are threatening jobs in Canada? Are there other costs that are not helping you compete, let alone having cheap Chinese tires flooded into the market?
Is big enough to sort of note. I mean, rising costs that everybody experiences, sure, but there's nothing. We buy a finished product. Certainly, the cost of the tread rubber that goes onto a retread has gone up significantly over the last 9 years. We attribute that to oil. We attribute that to economic. It's made in the U.S. largely, but nothing. We've never seen anything like this before.
And in terms of truckers and Canadian companies buying the cheaper product, they know it's not that it's on a storefront. You don't see this out with flashing lights. It seems to be that it's a sub-market, and they're buying these cheaper tires. Is that because their costs have gone up and they're trying to save money, or why are they buying these cheaper tires?
I think it's like we all experience when you're sort of faced with a smart economic decision that a premium tire with a bunch of retreads, you can do the math and say this makes sense, but I got to pay more today versus pay less right here as I'm standing there looking at a flat tire. And I think it's just it's almost that simple. That and that's part of when I said we're retooling our workforce to go out there and try to explain the value proposition of a retreaded tire versus a cheap disposable, but we're talking to farmers and loggers and ranchers and folks that are sometimes cash strapped and need that tire right now, and so they're happy to buy a below cost tire.
Yeah, and that's what we're hearing from farmers and truckers who are saying carbon tax and other costs are making that more difficult, and therefore I'm sure they're looking for cheaper options. Mr. Loomis, wanted to switch gears for a second, talk about the need for steel, the need for Canadian steel. How much steel right now is being used in the EV mega factories this government has announced and they're subsidizing? Do we know the amount of Canadian steel? Is it in contract, or do you know that workers are getting the benefit from these mega factories?
It is not in contract. They are not required to use Canadian fabricated steel or Canadian steel. For that matter. We are hoping that the companies like VW, for example, which we understand that a decision is imminent as to how, where they are going to get their fabricated steel and what companies they're going to be using in the building of that factory. We are very much encouraging them to look at the Canadian fabricators. One of the issues is there's a presumption that we don't have the capacity to be able to fabricate. That's not true. In fact, we have a very cohesive industry in that a lot of our members can partner to make sure that we do have that capacity. The presumption for us going forward is that any government-funded project should be using Canadian fabricated steel because it is taxpayer dollars going into our communities at a 4 times. That's a conservative estimate. We get a 4 times return on investment in our in using Canadian fabricated steel. Plus, there's much lower risk and much fewer supply chain disruptions as well.
Yeah, that's alarming to me.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Williams. We're
$50 billion and no Canadian steel.
Mr.
That's amazing.
Arya, 4 minutes, please.
Seeing you, I remember to check my appointment with Carl Tires. And I should say that the service has been quite good. I've been using it for years. It's been quite good. I did carefully listen to your comments. I understand we all need cheap products because everything is expensive. So I also understand your point that we need to impose tariffs on the stuff that is coming in, which is below the cost of the raw materials, as you said. At the same time, I don't want to be seen supporting a monopoly or oligopoly. How many tire retreading companies are there in Canada?
I don't know the number off the top of my head. It would be probably in the neighborhood of 75 to 150 is my guess.
I'm glad to hear that because when I just checked on my ChatGPT, it said that the Bridgestone, Michelin, and 1 or 2 companies, they control 70% of the market or something like that. That is not the case, right?
What they control is they are largely there's only a few companies out there that make the tread, but the people that can do the retreading work, there are lots of mom and pop tire shops. So independents that have a what's called a chamber where they can cook the tire, they retread right there on the spot.
I understand retreading. I was grew up in India where the fact of life is most of us use only retreads, whether it's the cars or trucks, everything. I'll come back to you. Mr. Loomis, your members also include steel manufacturers, right?
Not all of them, but yeah, some of them.
Okay, I'll come to that. You did mention that there are certain products, steel products, that are not manufactured in Canada. Did you say that we should not impose tariff on them?
No, certainly when it comes from China, when in a non-market economy, yes, we should. But yes.
So as long as the products that are not manufactured in Canada, if they're coming from China, you want the tariff to be imposed.
That's correct.
Did you say that for the federal government contracts, we should stipulate that the local steel has to be used?
We should stipulate that the work is done, the fabricated work is done in Canada by Canadian certified
So
fabricators.
if the U.S. government stipulates that U.S. contracts, U.S. federal government contracts should use U.S. steel only, what do you think about that?
Well, that's certainly a concern for us, and again, if we had the trade.
So don't you see that there's a bit difference that when it comes to U.S., we don't want them to impose the condition that local products should be used, but you want us in Canada to impose that? How is that possible when we want sort of free trade, at least among allies?
All we're asking for is reciprocity, and most of our work will be done in the U.S. That's just the nature of our business. Yeah. So.
And the steel industry, the installed capacity has not gone up for the last 20 years because of the ownership of all Canadian steel companies. They're all foreign owned now. They don't want to increase the capacity in Canada. We have the raw material, we have the talent, we have got the thing, and they don't want to export anywhere else other than the US or Mexico when we have signing free trade agreements all across the world. Why is that? How can we allow our industry, steel industry, being strangled? That's the word I want to use. Very carefully I'm using that. The number of people working in steel industry has been going down. There's no growth in installed capacity. And all because it's all foreign ownership. What do you say?
Well, certainly there's been a lot of innovation in the industry, thus the workforce going down, and but
the fundamental thing is
sorry,
that
Mr. Arya, your time is up. Maybe offline, Mr. Loomis can add a few things then. So to our witnesses, thank you so very much. Very valuable information from both of you. Appreciate it. We'll now adjourn the meeting.